we're back. Welcome to day 2 of the Biennial of the Americas Sustainable Summit. I'm Flora Jane, the Interim Executive Director. We have another exciting day of programming and networking in store for you. Young leaders are powerful advocates for environmental social justice, and their voice matters now more than ever.
Hi again, my name is Robin Swanheiser, and we're back day 2. Before we get started with this panel of young leaders, I am pleased to introduce our first speaker who will be reading some poems for us. Franklin Cruz is a Denver-based queer Latin poet whose work evokes themes of self-love, immigration, culture, nature, and intersectional identity. Welcome, Franklin Cruz, and following, we will be joined by our 4 young leaders speaking about the power of young leaders for change.
Hi, my name is Franklin Cruz. I'm a Denver artist, writer, and dancer. I'm also a science educator, and I'm really excited to be here with y'all today to share some poems with y'all. Hopefully y'all enjoy them. If you are at all interested, you can find me on Instagram under fcruzunido. And this first poem I wrote was inspired by just realizing how deeply connected my family has always been to nature. So hopefully y'all enjoy. I saw my mom get lost in love in the sky. She stood in the streets, face praying with a smile, with the same look when she kisses my father, she was with nature. You could tell she was loving and praying by the way she closed her eyes to just be. My family loves nature, so much so that the wind has more than once been inspiration to my poems. Songs gave me purpose. I searched less because instinct was blessed on me. I became free naturally being myself. My pen kicking up the pages, brown blood running the ritual. Little thing creator did, like, how you gonna bless us like that? With the proof, with the luck to break barriers with our work, fresh rain and water, full bellies and hands to grip hope, the grace of another sun to live and right by. That's the magic message within us, telling us to surrender to nature. The one we cannot access with open eyes in one head. Let the earth show you how it's done. Pick up some trash on your way out, ride a bike, reduce your plastic and water use. Remember, it's for the sake of us all, and grow some food for yourself. Let the Walmart farms die off. Feed your soul with the good food from freed soil and buy chickens from Abuelita down the block. She feeds them with sunflower seeds and oats, leaves the veggies and fruit scraps out for snacks, and they never seen another chicken die. That Abuelita is good like that. Doesn't want the bad blood in the meat if you're gonna buy it from her. Don't you know, even when forgotten, the old ways is always around, hiding in the backyards of old souls, locked in cities and suburbs. Some families never forgot the good old days. They're the ones who till the ground in the back. They look at the trees and see a cousin. The sun is strong and they say thank you. People who stay up to see the same moon from yesterday. They try to count the raindrops before it becomes impossible, and have probably watched squirrels too long for anyone's good. For they're the great people who never forgot the mother, the earth that created all good food, sea that stirs the pot, wind that carries the message. They just stare up, always looking for answers to questions asked by someone long dead. We just showed up for the message. We're just looking to the wilderness inside us, always waiting for a call in the wind. And ain't that a trip? Like something that only happens in a magic forest or the magic desert, just the magic instinct in us all. Being human is a bag of tricks. Our species is just Abuelita's bag. Every detail of humanity inside, each ethnicity, gender, language, mixing and moving as she moves. I'm just a nerd's pencil she took, mixing memories into concrete thoughts, mineralizing the meaning inside of poetry. Who remembers how we traded in our treehouse days, when branches were no longer our safe house, when our big toe became our big toe, never returning to those hands for feet. Now we walk, dance, salsa, hips flirting in that universal language. That's a big toe's blessing. Easy to overlook evolution's crafty nature. I can tell you one factor that separates you from the stupidity of a bear is a jaw muscle. Our jaw muscle, called a masseter, connects into the forehead's frontalis, squeezing on the frontal bone over our frontal lobe, where all dreams, hopes, wishes, happenings to the ancestral connection, what bears sacrifice, a relationship with ferocity and intelligence. With more of one, you lose less of the other. Our physical weakness gifted us an unforeseen power. Who remembers how intelligence became our gift? Building bridges out of thoughts shared like rain. People who visit the museum I teach at, they run up like little lightning storms, always bringing tornadoes of curiosity. They don't care about my science. They saw a sheep heart, and that's all that mattered at the moment. And I don't have to explain mechanisms. It's just a sheep heart. And isn't that cool? Remember what it means to hand down intelligence? Even if it's not in a book, some of the best things I've learned have come from the conversation. Best stories, my mythology. Seems silly to believe in something you can't see, but tell that to a microscopist whose job it is to discover cells and bacteria and viruses at levels you can't even imagine and dare to go even further than that. Remember how much DNA you have? Enough to wrap you like a mummy? Saved in the tiniest organelles of our cells. Wild, isn't it? We have libraries and libraries stashed in our bodies. When you are being your best self, you're playing a slideshow of your best ancestry. Oh, this kind of beauty. Your nose, patience, skin complexion, creativity, everyone who survived a bear, cholera, slavery, oppression, every scientist, caveman, parent, farmer, looking at the future for the first time, couldn't have known what's next. They just took it one step at a time. A bipedal blessing, a human just living it out. What's living within us, being human, it's just what's living within us, being human.
Hi, everyone. Wow, thank you so much, Franklin. That was incredible. I'm Ty Jacob. I use they, them pronouns. I'll be moderating the conversation today. I've been a community organizer for around 5 years now, focusing on issues of trans liberation, migrant justice, resource and wealth redistribution, Palestinian solidarity, and more recently, climate justice. I work at 2 orgs in Canada that are dedicated to youth empowerment in the sustainability sector. Those are Leading Change Canada and Student Energy, and I'm based in Toronto, or TK Ronto, in the language of the Mohawk, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. So today I'll be moderating this conversation about how young people have the power to transform systems of oppression and environmental degradation to build a world that we actually want to live in. We know that global warming is an ethical, political, and social issue, as well as an environmental and physical one. We know that the effects of climate change are not distributed equally, and that the most marginalized among us, racialized, poor, Indigenous, Black, migrant, and disabled people, have been and continue to be the most impacted by climate change in the Americas and worldwide. On top of that, the drivers of climate change tend to be the least negatively impacted by its harms. These drivers include countries in the global north, like the United States and Canada, and within those countries, the wealthy and white citizens. Young people in the environmental movement, especially those of us from groups that have been historically underrepresented in positions of power and leadership, raise the level of ambition, radically reimagine alternative systems, know how to implement unique localized solutions, and highly value incorporating solutions that take into account social justice and equity and diversity. Young people in the environmental movement, like these 3 panelists, have the power to radically reimagine how we go about driving sustainable change. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists, Esperanza, Soledad, Garcia, Jordan Chapman, and Christy, Drewman. They will all now introduce themselves and say a little bit more about their work. And we'll start with Esperanza.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Esperanza Soledad Garcia. Also, a quick shout out to everybody who's here today and those that couldn't come. So if you're here today, you're probably getting this message for a reason. And shout out to all my ancestors and all those who came before all of us here today. Thank you to all that and all of them. My name is Esperanza Soledad Garcia. Some people call me Sole or Pozole. My folks come from Mora, Nuevo Mexico. My parents are Anthony and Sandra Garcia, Melendez Spice, to include my grandparents. And I'm 19 years old. I am a prayer runner here in Denver, Ute, Cheyenne, Arapaho occupied lands here in Denver, Colorado. I'm an artist of all forms, and I'm just a young person trying to help save this earth, I guess. I'm part of the Earth Guardians and the International Indigenous Youth Council. I myself am a Chicano Two-Spirit person, and I'm honestly very blessed to be here today and to share this message with these awesome panelists and folks right here. So I'll pass it on to whoever wants to go next.
Is it me? Is it my turn? Awesome. Well, again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I'm super excited to be a part of this panel. I'm super excited to, learn and kind of engage in some meaningful conversation. And I want to take the opportunity to thank those who have made the track for me, who've opened doors for me, those who came before me and have, provided so that I'm here, who survived so that I'm here. My name is Chapman. I'm from Chicago. I'm a graduate of Tuskegee University, and between spending summers in Mississippi and the illustrious agricultural history of Tuskegee University, I developed a connection to the outdoors that really inspired me to make sure that other people that look like me, those who don't look like me, and those who've been disenfranchised or kept away from the movement have the opportunity to re-engage in an authentic way that makes it a longevity, a long relationship, a long-lasting, sustainable relationship for the future. So can't wait to continue the conversation.
Hi everyone, my name is Christy Drewman. I'm based on Ohlone land, otherwise known as the Bay Area. I am a Jewish and Filipino American environmental activist and content creator. I have my own podcast and media series called Brown Girl Green, which is focused on uplifting the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color worldwide who are coming up with creative solutions to the climate crisis. And I'm working to do creative storytelling, to empower folks, especially environmental organizations and companies, to really believe and enact a process of decolonization. And I'm just really honored to be in this space because I think that young people are at the core of shifting the culture and the narrative around sustainability and what needs to be done to make that happen.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves. I'm so excited to dig into the inspiring work that you're all doing. Also, for the audience to know, there is a Q&A chat box. Feel free to put in questions throughout the conversation, and there'll be about 10 to 15 minutes at the end where I'll be asking those questions. My first question for the panelists is, what inspires each of you to do climate and environmental work? Who have your teachers been, and what have been your moments of inspiration? And I want to start with Jordan for this question.
My inspiration is so that other people can see the beauty of the joy. My mentors and those who've inspired me, I can say my grandfather is one. And I can also say the lineage, the legacy of George Washington Carver. Being a student at Tuskegee University, I had the opportunity to work under the tutelage of just like learning everything at the George Washington Carver Museum, and to work for a person, to learn the legacy of a person who sacrificed his life so that others can grow and benefit and live healthier lives, live more sustainable lives, and improve practices of people that were really disenfranchised or have been abused, who've been neglected. So many slaves throughout the South, so many indentured servants, so many people. That really connected me to the environment because Carver reinvented what farming looked like. Carver reinvented what agriculture looked like. He had a philosophy of use what you have to make things for the next generation, taking care of the earth, not using more than you need to. So, getting that connection from my grandfather at an early age of spending those summers in rural Mississippi, coming from Chicago, was a big transition. And for me, it was a therapeutic transition because living in what we call is like a concrete jungle, you don't really have the same opportunities to get outdoor and engage in the outdoors the same way everyone else does, whether it's from gang violence, whether it's from cold climate, whether it's from just not being, adept to understanding what it's like to be outside. there's a variety of things that go into it, and going down south was a way for me to release and get out. And, you know, recently I read something that really kind of, and we can elaborate on this later in the conversation, is the intersectionality of it all, of where does the environmental movements fit in with the social justice movement. And it was powerful. I read how Emmett Till was so excited to go to Mississippi that summer for 3 reasons. 1, to get some fresh air. 1, to go fishing along the Tallahatchie River. And 2, to just be outside and be outdoors and get away from the summer, the city vibe. So like, if we look at it like that, that is a perfect understanding of where this man who wanted to get this child, who wanted to get away from the city, went down to an environment that's supposed to be open and welcoming and nature. They went outdoors, didn't have the opportunity to really enjoy it because of societal issues, because of racial issues, because of racial bias. So it's my passion, my duty, my inspiration to make sure that we can build beyond that, that we can make sure that a lot of the Blacks, a lot of the people of color, a lot of the people who don't have the opportunity to get outside can get out of their bubbles and be able to experience the beauty of nature.
Thank you, Jordan. Christy, do you want to answer next?
Yeah, so I would say that for me, it's been a long journey, but basically I would say that when I was in university, basically I just didn't see anyone who looked like me in environmental spaces, especially other Filipino Americans. And even more so, just like wasn't learning about how my culture or my identities or my ethnicity, like any of it was fitting into the sustainability field. And I just wanted to explore what were the stories and the experiences that could make me feel actually more connected to those spaces, whether it be nature, whether it be climate activism. And yeah, more and more as I learned specifically about what's going on in the Philippines, especially because most people in the Philippines are on the front lines of the climate crisis, and their resilience and their power and like their desire to organize. And so many environmental activists out in the Philippines are getting killed right now by advocating for environmental justice, reporting on environmental issues. And that's always been very alarming for me to think about my privileges as a Filipino American, knowing that I have a responsibility within the diaspora to be able to raise my voice and use the tools I have to represent that space and to create more spaces that I didn't have access to when I was younger when getting into this field, because I knew so many of my friends who identified as Black, Indigenous, and people of color in higher education in a lot of these white academic institutions who didn't feel comfortable in these spaces because they couldn't connect with the language or the information they were being delivered and left. And we don't want that. We want, as Jordan was saying, for more people to be included in this conversation, because there is so much beauty and healing that could be found that we've been removed from, been ripped from due to colonization. And I want my storytelling and the work that I do to help bring more people back into that.
I guess it's kind of like my turn to go. Man, I don't know. Last time that we so the question is kind of like how we found our way into this and like our inspiration and such. Something this has resonated with me very much, which is how Jordan and I I don't know, I feel like we kind of share some things in that I feel like I also was kind of raised by my elders and raised by older people, and still am, like I'm still always around with like older folks. Like sometimes it's hard for me to be like with kids my age because sometimes we're not involved in the same things, which is okay, And I feel like for me it was a return to my homeland. I grew up here in Denver, and I'd always be traveling back to northern New Mexico to go take care of our water system, to take care of our land. My mom, she grows crops and such, and we have an ancient acequia system where we have water run up mountains and stuff, and learning that history from, hanging out with like your grandparents or something, and they teach you like these things that you never would have learned otherwise, or like actually teaching you how to work with your hands, to me is so important to me. It's so cherishable. It's like a pot of like some bowl that I can just keep drinking out of, and it's always replenishes me, you know? I think that's something that I've, especially now that I'm so online, have been finding my value in, is just being outside and hanging out with sitting with the tree people and visiting with the boulders and seeing what they have to say and their stories and such are something that really, really grounds me, have brought me into this work. Especially as well, like recognizing that I'm a child of colonization. I'm a child of that legacy, being indigenous and Spanish and French and whatever else that I encompass. Knowing that I carry that privilege to actually be here on this land and being able to talk with those people, with those plant people, and being able to bring their stories in and not forget them. I'm doing architecture right now, and even just finding ways to bring in like the mineral folks and their geometry into my work is something that I found really valuable.
Thank you. So I think a theme across the work that inspires all of you is the fact that looking at the mainstream environmental movement, you're not necessarily seeing people talking about things or looking like you look like. And I mean, we know that the mainstream environmental movement today is mostly made up of white and wealthy people, to the exclusion of more diverse perspectives and knowledges. We also know that other non-white social movements exist to protect and advocate for the environment, like Indigenous land and water defenders and protesters and community organizers in places like Flint, Michigan. But because of racism, these movements have not necessarily been understood more widely as environmental movements. So I'm wondering what your vision of an environmental movement is that centers diverse young people, especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color. What would a movement like that look like? What would it feel like? What could it accomplish? And what would it take to get there? What are structural ways to engage more people and help more people build a personal connection with the environment? And I want to start with Christy for this question.
I didn't prepare for this one. This is a great question. Well, I think it just has to start with acknowledging the stolen Indigenous land. That's a big part of it. Like, how are we creating platforms for Indigenous youth, like Esperanza and others, to be able to share their connections with the land? Like, they're being passed on very valuable and rich information from their elders, and we need to like really lift up Indigenous leadership. I think that's a really big and neglected part of the equation. But I think on top of that, there just needs to be more programs and funding given to environmental justice organizations. Like, there's already been so much work on the ground for decades, and a lot of these organizations are strapped for cash and resources and capacity. So I don't think it's about creating new organizations or new coalitions. I think it's about creating those intergenerational gaps, because we do have elders in fighting for these things and like clearly understand the intersectionality and have had to advocate for that. Whereas like for younger people, it's almost like we're, at least in these circles, it's intuitive, and we are aware of it, and we're kind of like can naturally latch onto it. So it's like, how do we also like empower ourselves to validate that knowledge? And I think that it's about creating more youth advisory boards and youth forums to be able to like, you know, tell people who do have the funding and the resources and the power, like, you need to offer reparations. You need to give it to these organizations that have been doing the work, and young people need to be in the lead of that conversation. So I just view it as a shifting of power dynamics, of funding, and of just like the politics around how young people's voices are oppressed mostly in these spaces. Like, we're used as tokens, and we're used as like these fun things that are like, oh, the youth are going to solve it, but it's like, we're not going to give you the money, and we're not going to give you the actual infrastructure to make that happen. And it's like, that's not okay. So that's my vision for it. And I think it's actually something that's totally feasible.
I think, you know, this is kind of a unique question. For me, my long-term vision is to not even have the need for an environmental movement, because this is such a critical part of our life. We all, like, even when you disenfranchise some people and drop toxins near them and use unpractical farming practices, you're hurting everyone in the long run. So we must understand that we all have to be a part and care for the place that we live in. We need to take certain steps to make sure that we engage those who haven't been engaged. We need to make sure that we rectify the wrongs that we've done in regards to just illegal dumping and just all of these practices that happen in these communities of color. Like, your area code should not determine your environmental outlook. You should not, because you live in a certain area code, because you look a certain way, should not determine the environmental influences that you have to be impacted with. Your air should not be of a lesser quality. Your drinking water supply should not be of a lesser quality. We need to understand that when we have natural disasters occurring more often, when we have environmental issues that are happening everywhere, they are going to impact us. They are going to impact the people that we interact with. And it's important that we think about it holistically and understand it's not a white, black, yellow, orange, it's not a color movement. It's a planet. To have this, it's the only planet that we have, and we need to take advantage of it. I mean, we need to take care of it, and we need to take care of it right away. And that's going to start with going into communities and making sure that you rectify wrongs. I remember I worked with a nonprofit in South Carolina, and one of the issues is that language barrier. So you have a lot of people who lived in poor communities in South Carolina that were trying to help people in poor and what they call like public housing get out, like make their homes more economical for the winter. But there was also an opportunity to talk about climate change. So it's like, hey, during the summer months, we were like, have you had to use your air conditioner a lot this summer? They're like, yeah, my bill is running up. Well, there's a reason for that. Or how do I prepare for the winter when I only have X, Y, and Z? Well, there's ways you can cover your window seals. There's ways you can do this. And it's about changing that language. If you had people that didn't look like you that were going into these communities trying to tell you how to make your homes more energy efficient, how to become more sustainable in the ways that you do your living, it wouldn't resonate the same. But if you got people that look like you, that this is my auntie, let me talk to her this way, I know how to resonate, I know how to connect with her, you're going to see an impact, you're going to see a change in life. And this is where the youth play. The youth have to play a critical role because it is their world in the future. I mean, as my shirt says, the youth will build a better future. And it starts with the youth activating and taking more responsibility. And you all got to fight harder than us because it's your world that you have to live in the future. So I hope that kind of answers the question.
Love it when Jordan speaks. Can I say that? You can tell it ain't no shell speaking. That's a being speaking through the shell, through the body. Jordan is speaking through the body. I love that. Someone told me study the Anunnaki. They're like, they come from inner space, or they're inner people, and it's the inner self that's speaking. It's not the body, not just the shells. It's the body speaking. On that note, of course, I'm a young person. I'm 19. I'm sorry, Jordan, you were saying something?
No, you're good.
I'm 19, and I just want to say, like, I don't represent all people. Also, a big shout out to somebody from Colombia, Senora Kelly Yasira Valencia, Afro Latina. Thank you for being here, Matli. Thank you. I think for me, it's very much mental. I feel like for me, can I take some notes on it? For me, it's very mental. We live in this world, like we live in a petrochemical world where part of its toxicness is rooted in ourselves. In some ways, we are the machine. In some ways, we are the machine, and we're working, we're giving our energy, and we also hold toxins. We hold toxins, and that's kind of what self-destruction is in my perception. Like, it's toxins that bring us down, that bring our own communities down, you know? So I think a lot of it is just starting off mentally, reflecting ourselves and seeing what truly are we? What truly am I? What do I stand for? What are some principles that I hold? You know, and that comes from like a really like deep, also very sacred place to ask that. But because of these toxins that we carry, we take those toxins from ourselves, which colonialism has put onto us, and we're bringing it out into the natural world. Because before colonialism, many nations, many peoples, many non-human beings were doing this same thing. We're living their lives but recognizing their path in the wheel of life, recognizing where they stood in the whole universal wheel of life. And that kind of that to me reminds me of thinking coherently. It reminds me of thinking with your whole being and seeing how am I really, what am I really putting inside and what am I putting out, you know? Thinking coherently, like mind, body, spirit. What are we actually thinking? Recognizing all these different realities, all the different dimensions that we hold and that we live in. So thinking coherently, really like being not biased, but really looking at both sides and seeing where we actually land. And I think another piece of this, I'm sorry, I'm kind of going off track, but another piece of this is also people say land back. A lot of indigenous peoples and humans and people say land back, but when we really say land back, part of what when we say land back is saying giving the land back to themselves, saying that we don't own the land. Because if you listen to many languages that are even English can be even English is like when you listen to some of these beautiful original languages, you can hear the shh and the gush and the from the leaves, the wind, the and the way they sound. This is part of reimagining language and really putting it in a way that makes sense to us. So that's kind of what I wanted to say about bringing the land back to themselves and recognizing that we don't own anything. We're borrowing the land from the generations past us, from the non-humans, from the plant people, from the four-legged, from the winged. We're borrowing this and also owning our own assets, because I think it's an interesting conversation, like what it means to own your own land, quote unquote, especially I just said that, you know, but also like, what does it look like to do like grassroots things and actually find ways for youth to be on land and learn from the land. I think an interesting organization to shout out here is Tierra Amarilla, also known as Al Frente de Lucha, which is a organization out of northern New Mexico and Denver, Colorado, and all throughout this hemisphere. And they do a lot of interesting work like that. So yeah.
Thank you. That piece about how so much of our language like is taught to us by the land around us is so beautiful, and that's going to be sticking with me for a while. Thank you for saying that. So I want to move to some more recent events. I think that for many of us, the last week meant a lot of sleepless nights, staying up late, hoping to catch a glimpse of the final result of the US election. It's clear now that Biden has won, and this obviously feels like a win against fascism. But Biden is still an opponent to our movements. We still have to fight this administration to see the environmental changes we want to see. We still have to fight this administration to see the changes in racist policies and institutions that we want to see, and more than that. And besides, we also have to deal with the fact that nearly half of the US voted for a platform of very visible and very obvious white supremacy. So building off of some of what Esperanza was talking about, how do we think coherently? How do we think actively? What do you think our next steps forward are after an incredibly divisive US election? How do we remind people to think like you were saying, Esperanza, coherently? How do we more deeply examine the ways that we communicate about the climate movement across difference? And Esperanza, I want you to start this one.
Okay. Also, a big shout out to the Spanish translator. You're doing a really good job. And I know this is really challenging, so thank you. I'm trying to think. I'm not the only person that's thought about this before. Many people have thought way back in time. People have been thinking about this. And it just seems like up to this moment where with media, it's the when, why, how, when to think that really captures our attention and doesn't let us, it captures our attention. And I'm not quite sure how to answer that question, but I can give you some titles to look up, because I'm trying to think of like the words, but sometimes the words don't exactly go through right. Some people to look up, I would say, is John Trudell, who's spoken enormously about this, a rapper named KRS-One, who's also a teacher, hip hopper. He's great. Look into him. Let me pass it on to my compas right here and see what they have to say. Maybe I'll learn a little something.
Does anyone want to jump in? Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, let's kind of hit it in the layered effect. I think for our youth, one thing that was inspiring to me is the passion that the youth are expressing over these past few weeks. They're letting their voice be known, they are activating, and they are mobilizing and putting their self on the front line to fight a cause. I saw that. It reminds me of the civil rights movements when you think about the sit-ins that went in across the South. These were youth-led movements where kids were coming together, spending their weekends, figuring out how to properly protest, understanding the laws, thinking about the bailouts, and essentially taking hold of what their future was going to look like. And they were tired of the future that their parents had survived, and they wanted to see something new, and they were willing to make a sacrifice to do that. So I think one step that we can do in help uniting us is activate our youth, mobilize our youth, and empower our youth. I think if we look at them, the youth really don't have that many differences yet. They're learning a lot of behavior from what they see from their families. And this is an opportunity to jump in before they actually start to embed. I am a Democrat, I'm a Republican. I stand on these values, which I really don't understand, but because my mother did it, because my father did it, I want to just align with this. But they really don't know what they're standing for. And I think what is an excellent transition to the next layer is that for that middle-aged group, that kind of 25 and up, is really figuring out how to stop using divisive language to talk about people that disagree with you. It's not going to help strengthen that relationship, because you're going to need the same amount of people that voted for Trump and the same amount of people that voted for. We need both resources on either side. It's not that we're going to use our X amount of million people and we don't need you all, or we need both of us to come together. And we got to realize that a lot of us are fighting the same issues. And I saw this firsthand when I was working as an AmeriCorps in West Virginia. And again, a lot of people didn't look like me in West Virginia. They lived in coal country, and they had this connection to coal. Like, we fueled America, and this is something that we're proud of. But when these coal companies took advantage of you and left, and now you don't have any economic dependence, you're now trying to fight against the government to really provide opportunity. So what we did is we brought in, our goal was to develop sustainable green businesses and sustainable green training so that the people who live in these communities could qualify and live in better lives. But the first thing you saw is that we did an experiment, and we had a kind of clear kind of pitcher, and we dipped it underwater, and we asked the children, what color should the water be? And without hesitation, orange, 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 they're yelling out orange. This is acid mine water, acid mine drainage water. So you have kids who are comfortable, who have lived in environmental disasters for years, and think it's normal. Oh, our dogs play in it, my shoes are orange, everything is orange. And it's like, well, how do we activate that community to understand what's going on in Flint? How do we activate the Flint community to understand what's going on with microplastics in the West Coast? How do we understand each other's traumas and use our resources, our knowledge, our communities to help fix them? So it's going to take an activation across spheres, across ages, across spectrums to really elevate our next step and to remove away from the divisive language we've seen so much in this past few weeks, past few months.
Yeah, just building off of that, I would say that there's a great need for just more storytellers and more media creators. This is just from me as someone who uses media as my form of activism. We just need more of that. There's so much climate denial, and they have great platforms. There's people out there that are educating people that science isn't real, and they have a lot of money and political power backing them. And that's scary. That's what keeps me up at night, is people that have these media platforms that are literally going to destroy and oppress a lot of our communities. And so for me, I think a really big way forward is the best way to communicate to your community. You have the best language, not the media, not Fox News, not CNN. You have the best resources to be able to investigate these things and be a translator for your community. And we need more translators. No one platform, no one activist movement group, no one nonprofit is going to create the language for that. And I think that's the problem. That's a part of this divisiveness, is we're depending so much on this left liberal language to be the end all be all of how we operate and how we're doing things. And I think that when I think about even the Democratic Party and the amount of people they missed in mobilizing people and getting them on board and talking to them and having real conversations about what's actually going on in their lives, that upsets me. And I think it was a really big wake-up call with how close things were, that there's a lot more work to do in doing what is, I just learned this term, deep canvassing, which is like deep intentional listening, actually having those one-on-one conversations in your community to learn from people who you may or may not agree with. And that's where it needs to start. We have like time to take the time now that we can take a breath to like actually have these conversations with people in our own communities. And I know there's resistance and I know there's vulnerability involved with that, but I think especially for the young people, like there's so many bridge builders out there who I think have the patience and the resources to want to do that. And if you identify as that, like we so desperately need bridge builders. And I just want to add on to that, like, I think when I look at Florida and the fact that, yes, they voted not for Joe Biden, but like they voted for, a raise on the minimum wage. Like there's people voting on what people on the right might frame as like socialist policies, but ultimately it's thinking about the most oppressed in our country today, which are the workers, the working class. And I think, if we were able, as Jordan said, to identify that we're not so different in that struggle in our own communities and being able to translate and talk about it that way to actually meet people where they're at, I think things would be a lot different.
I love this image that you are all building of like activating, connecting a really strong network across not only the country, but even like the continents, and that being a powerful force for change. Esperanza, I'm wondering if you wanted to add anything. You don't have to, but there is the option to.
I think one thing that's just kind of like something that I reflect on a lot is because I have people in my own circle, my family, who are Trump supporters, but also like Trump is just a face. Trump is simply a puppet in all of this. Let's be real here. This is a lot of these elections be not real, and they don't know who's gonna win in some ways. So that's there. But one thing that I notice is just before we see each other as Democrats, before we see each other as Republican, before we see them as socialist, whatever, any other title that any other jacket or coat that you want to layer on, at the bottom of it, they are human being. Human being. Human being. And I think that we've forgotten what it means to be that. That's it.
Thank you. There's so much wisdom amongst all of you. Thank you for all of you for sharing your thoughts. I have a final question for you today, and then we'll move to audience Q&A. So folks in the audience, feel free to throw some questions in the Q&A. But my final question is, I'm wondering, what are your most urgent calls to action or questions for reflection that you'd like to leave the audience with today? And anyone that wants to hop in first can hop in first.
I'll finish off, I guess. I just felt like, yeah, I would say use the internet as a resource. Do not get swamped in. Always challenge what you hear, even if it's from people who you admire. Anyone you put on a pedestal are still human beings. They are flawed, but they are also, perfect at the same time. And I think that people need to question and think for themselves. Practice critical thinking is so important. We need people who are unique. We need people who are learning and curious and think for themselves and are able to develop their own narratives and stories as translators to activate and mobilize the people in their closest circles. Because I think that interpersonal motivation and finding community outside of that, you know, virtually or nationwide with other people who think like you. Both of those things simultaneously are going to be very important in the next couple years. So I just want people to know that they're not alone, that there's so many people out here that want to share their ideas and resources with you. And yeah, I'm happy to connect you with those people. So yeah, please stay in touch with all of us here.
I'll go next. I saw Jordan go. I think one thing that I would like to share is something that I always circle back to, is just asking myself, who benefits and why? Who benefits and why? And also asking the other side of the coin as well. Asking the other side of that coin. Yes, I say all of that. I second all what Christy said. And also, like, look on, I mean, here with Corona and all that, we're losing so many elders. And something that I think it's actually an African saying is that, like, every time an elder dies or passes or transitions on, a whole library of knowledge leaves with them. So I think doing that, and that also reminds me of, like, so much innate knowledge that we have already, and so much of it that we already carry since the day we were born. And also realizing that there's so many other places outside of this earth, because even if this earth were to crumble to the ground, there'd still be places outside of here. There's so many places outside of here. When you go to sleep, imagine yourself doing what you want to be doing, 2 or 3 minutes. Just put that out there. Maybe it'll come to you. But also, there's so many other places outside of here, so many different dimensions to be explored and to be found and all of this. So I think one thing, I guess, like, living spherically and also asking those important questions to yourself, being true to yourself, for sure. I guess it's kind of like really cliche in some ways, but recognizing all that you have, the good and the bad. If you fucked up, you fucked up. And that's what it is. But just being honest and transparent.
I love what everyone has been saying, and I want to jump on another point before I kind of give my final thoughts. Christy brought a great point of just the importance of seeing people that look like you engaged in things that matter. Representation is powerful, so I think that's one call to action, is increase representation in an authentic way that truly embodies the spirit of the people that you want to engage, instead of trying to pull the people out of their community to fit into your silhouette of what it means. I think, and I love that this focus is the power of the youth. I go back to a quote that I believe Ted Kennedy gave at the funeral of Robert Kennedy, and the quote goes, "The answer is to rely on youth, not a time of life, but a state of mind, a temper of will, a quality of imagination, a predominance of courage over timidity, of an appetite for adventure over the love of ease." And I think that's what's needed in everybody, is that we, especially in our older generation, in our, ourselves, and people who have been stuck in their ways, people who are losing hope, people who've lost their imagination. We must look back and reflect on, take me back to a kid again, when I felt like I could take over the world, when I felt like I could just be whatever I wanted to be. Don't let the societal norms shrink your creativity, your imagination, because those things will harden you and will harden the way that we interact with each other, which is what we need to move forward. So I think if we look back and learn to value the difference, value what makes us like individuals, and understand that when we all come together, it's just like a gumbo. You throw in all these very good vegetables, and together you have this nice mixture of just something that's just like, it's sustaining, it's beautiful, it's tasty, it's flavorful, it's just amazing. And I think that's what we need a little bit more of. We need to be a little bit more gumbo in this world. Come together to make this beautiful melting pot of a mixture that's going to feed us for the rest of our life.
I love this image of gumbo as like the world that we want to live in, as this world where all of these flavors and spices and vegetables come together to create something incredible. Like, this idea of synergy is so good. Thank you. Okay, so we have time for a little bit of audience Q&A. Hopefully we can get to more than one question, but I'm gonna start with one. And this is from Megan. What messages or calls to action do you have to youth who are a part of this movement, but may sit with more relative privilege, like class, wealth, race, or network privilege?
Actually, wait 1 second. Let me read that again, just so I know.
Yeah, I'll say it again. I said it quite fast. What messages or calls to action do you have to youth who are a part of this movement, but may sit with more relative privilege? So class, wealth, race, or network privilege.
I'd like to jump in. So, I mean, just to clarify, we're asking, the question is, how do those who are in the movement who have privilege of some sorts continue to be involved or to use your privilege? I mean, I got a perfect example. When I was working, when I had an internship opportunity to come to Patagonia, the rate was not reflective of what the cost of living was. So what happens? I can't take the internship because I don't have anywhere to stay because I don't make enough money, and the money that I would make would just leave me at zero at the end of the month. So one of the co-workers who has an extra bedroom who was like, hey, you could just stay in my place for free. Those are the things that enabled me to continue my journey. Like, those are the ways you can use your privilege, whether it's like, oh, I know somebody that can get you a job, or I know somewhere, like, talk to these people, get to know them, and use your privilege, your connections, your network to help lift somebody else up out of their situation.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I think that if you have connections, especially to philanthropies, to foundations, to just like wealthier institutions, if your family is intergenerational wealth, and that's something that there's actually like a lot of young people right now, I'm forgetting the name of it, but there is a coalition of young people who do have like wealth and privilege that are trying to like, really do an active process of reparations, like trying to actually funnel intergenerational wealth into social change and progressive issues. So if you identify with that, there is a big community of people doing that. So try to find like-minded people that are doing that too, because maybe that's something you're interested in but don't know where to start. And there's a lot of people that can offer guidance on how to go about that. But I think on top of that, it's also about just like making space. So like if you notice that like a Black, Indigenous, or person of color like is in a room and they're not talking, or you can tell they're visibly uncomfortable with the energy in a space, like speak up, create that space for them and be like, hey, we haven't listened or heard from this person. We haven't given space for this person to talk. Like, this person's not even in a leadership role. Why is that? Like, ask those critical questions on the power dynamics, because at the end of the day, people are going to listen to you more than they're going to listen to me. So I think you need to step up and take responsibility on leveraging that to support those of us who can.
Can you guys hear me all right? Yeah, okay, it's a little bit slow. Okay. One experience that really reminds me of this exactly is one time I was at a gathering of youth, a future. Basically, the assignment was like, come up with a strategy for these 3 days. It was like basically the Earth Day live kind of thing. We're doing like Earth Day organizing things, and we're like, 3 days we have come up with an idea, something like that. And so I came with the International Indigenous Youth Council and the Earth Guardians. We grouped up, we went off somewhere else. We had to leave that energy behind to go to our own little thing and have our own idea. So we did that. We had a great idea, which we ended up actually going with it. We came back to the bigger circle. We presented the idea. And at first, it was mostly, let's see, it was like, okay, but whatever, that doesn't even matter. But we came out, we presented our idea. We got pretty much shut down automatically. And then homegirl from Divest Education was like, she was like, y'all swear that you want Indigenous leadership. Y'all swear that you want Indigenous leadership, but when they come with an idea, y'all shoot it down real quick. And that was exactly what it was. Like, you say that you want Indigenous leadership, but when they come and bring you ideas, bring you the experience and all that, y'all shut it down real quick. So is this really, that's in some ways showing that you don't stand on your principle. And also at the same time, like, I think actually Jordan and Christy and I were having this conversation earlier. I was like, is it really the dentists that is hoarding the wealth? Is it really the dentists who make a lot of money a year? Is it really the doctors? Is it really the chiropractors? Is it the engineers? Is it these higher level people? Or is it like oil executives that are actually hoarding most of the wealth? So it ain't like, for example, my mom is an accountant. She makes pretty good money. She's an accountant. She learned that trade. Are we really going after her and her being like upper middle class, or like the people who are hoarding most of the wealth on the planet and who are also killing our planet and our spirits in the same swipe?
Yeah, for sure. I'm also just a quick plug for what Christy was talking about. So the group that organizes young wealthy people in the States is called Resource Generation, and there's a sister group in Canada called Resource Movement. So anyone on the call with access to wealth and class privilege who's under 35, go check out those organizations. So we only have 3 minutes left, which means that it's time to round into closing remarks. It was such a pleasure to talk with you three today. I really am, I'm just like so taken aback by the wisdom, knowledge, like love that was communicated in this conversation today. For me, some of the important takeaways were thinking about the ways that we should be all working together. I'm really drawn to Jordan's image of gumbo, and also to this image that I think everyone was building of basically creating a spicy, flavorful, strong network across the continents to put pressure on the people that are destroying the planet, to build a solid ground movement, a movement that is based in land-based knowledge, a movement that takes into account diverse experiences, traditional ecological knowledges, the knowledge that is experienced of Black, Indigenous, and people of color that doesn't center wealthy and white people, and that really uplifts a diverse range of knowledges to create something powerful, sustainable, and healing for our planet. Thank you so much, Esperanza, Jordan, and Christy, for joining us today and for sharing so much good stuff. It was a pleasure talking.